Your ascent on the social ladder. Discover how to reach the top. A work created by Oscar Gonzalez for Biblio Studio. Chapter 1. The First Step. How to Begin Your Ascent. Those who know how to think but do not know how to act are only halfway to power. Baltasar Gracian. Imagine yourself standing at the foot of a staircase. Not just any staircase, but the one that represents your ascent in life, the path toward a better place, toward greater respect, recognition, and opportunity. The first step always feels the hardest, not because it is higher, but because it requires breaking away from what is familiar. It is that moment when you stop standing still and dare to move upward. Many people spend their entire lives staring at that staircase, talking about what they would do if only they dared to climb, dreaming of what they could achieve if circumstances were different, but they never lift their foot. Gracian was right. Thinking without acting leaves you stuck halfway, and that halfway point may feel comfortable, but it is also a silent prison of frustration where regrets pile up from those who never dared to take the first step. What you must understand is this: the ascent does not begin when you achieve something grand, when you earn a title, receive a promotion, or hear the applause. It begins earlier, in the invisible moment when you stop waiting and decide to move. That inner decision, simple yet powerful, is what separates those who climb from those who remain immobile. Perhaps you've been there, waiting for the perfect moment to act, when you've gained more experience, when you've saved more money, when you've made better connections. But that perfect moment never comes. Life will always bring doubts, risks, and obstacles. Meanwhile, others, perhaps less skilled or less prepared than you, are already climbing because they didn't wait. History is filled with examples that prove this truth. Consider Claudius, who would become Emperor of Rome. Before ascending to power, he was dismissed as clumsy, stammering, weak, and unfit to govern. His family saw him as useless, and that perception kept him far from the deadly political intrigues of the court. Yet his apparent weakness became his shield. Because he didn't appear threatening, he survived the conspiracies that destroyed men far more brilliant and ambitious. By feigning incompetence, he remained hidden in the shadows of power. And when opportunity arose after Caligula's death, the soldiers proclaimed him Caesar. What seemed like a curse became his opening. Claudius proved that you don't need to fit the mold of a perfect leader to rise. You only need to move, sometimes with what others call flaws, and turn them into part of your strategy. The first step does not demand greatness, it demands action. And often that action is small, almost imperceptible, yet loaded with meaning. Leadership and influence are not born from spectacular gestures, but from subtle decisions that shift the dynamics in your favor. Look at Pericles in 5th century BC Athens. While his rivals shouted in the assembly to be heard, he deliberately lowered his voice. Calm, measured, even quieter than normal, yet his composure forced everyone else into silence so they could listen. His silence carried more weight than 1,000 shouts. With a single minimal gesture, he commanded respect. The lesson is clear. Power often emerges from the subtle, the unexpected, from what compels others to adapt to you rather than you adapting to them. This is why you must understand, thinking is not enough. You can fill notebooks with ideas, read countless books, imagine dozens of strategies. All of that is fine, but unless you take a real step, it all dissolves into air. No one ascends by theory alone. Movement is what opens the path. Action, even imperfect action, is what gives you experience, connections, and learning. Social ascent is practical. It is learned through doing. Claudius would never have become emperor had he not acted when opportunity knocked. Pericles would never be remembered had he not put his speaking style into practice. Both understood that action is the only bridge between thought and power. I know that fear of rejection is the greatest enemy at this first step. It stops us before we even begin. You imagine criticism, failure, ridicule. But I want you to see it differently. Rejection is inevitable and even necessary. Each no you hear, each obstacle you face is not failure. It is training. Rejection is not a wall that blocks you. It is a rung on the ladder that strengthens you. Claudius endured years of mockery, but those taunts steeled him for his moment. Pericles was criticized for speaking too softly, but that very style gave him authority. What appeared to be weakness was, in reality, the price of another step upward. That is the secret of the first step, accepting that you do not start at the top. The mistake many make is wanting immediate results, instant brilliance. But true ascent doesn't work that way. It is built step by step. Each step, no matter how small, brings you closer and transforms you. The value lies in consistency, in direction, in the courage to keep climbing even when the summit is not yet visible. A simple gesture, a word spoken at the right moment, an introduction to someone who could open a door, a proposal made when others stayed silent, all of these are steps. None of them are insignificant if they push you upward. And now I want to speak to you directly. That first step in front of you will not be taken by anyone else. You can wait your entire life for someone to push you forward, for someone to recognize your talent without you showing it, but that day will never come. Others support those who are already moving, not those who remain dreaming. You must decide whether you want to stay halfway or dare to advance. When you catch yourself thinking too much and acting too little, remember, Gracian, to think without acting is to condemn yourself to mediocrity. Remember Claudius, who used what seemed like weakness to become emperor. Remember Pericles, who, by simply speaking softer than others, commanded respect. They understood that ascent begins the moment you stop waiting and choose to act. The first step lies before you now. It is not grand, it is not spectacular, but it is decisive. In the moment you take it, you will leave behind the crowd that remains dreaming on the ground. And when you do, you will discover that the hardest part was never climbing. It was daring to begin. Chapter 2. Image as a silent weapon. The world rewards appearances almost as much as merit. La Rochefoucauld. As much as we may resist admitting it, society rarely judges us for who we are deep inside. It almost always judges us by what we show. You may have talent, intelligence, or even good intentions, but what truly shapes your ascent is how others perceive you. We don't live in a world that automatically rewards merit. We live in a world where the appearance of merit, the projection of authority, and the aura of confidence carry as much weight as the actual substance. That is why it is so important to learn to use image as a silent weapon. This is not about being superficial or living behind a facade, but about understanding that perception is the first doorway you must cross before you are ever given the chance to prove your value. History shows that the shrewdest leaders understood this truth better than anyone. Elizabeth I of England is a fascinating example. She ruled at a time when being a woman at the head of a kingdom was already a disadvantage in the eyes of many powerful men. Yet she transformed that apparent fragility into a majestic theatre. Her dresses were extravagant to the extreme, heavily embroidered, made of the most expensive fabrics, adorned with enormous necklaces, with elaborate hairstyles that seemed to elevate her stature beyond the human. That theatricality was neither whim nor frivolity. It was strategy. When a foreign diplomat entered her court, he encountered not merely a woman of flesh and blood, but a figure resembling a sacred icon. In a world where politics was also a game of symbols, her attire was a direct message. I am England, and I am not to be challenged. She turned artifice into real power. The lesson is clear. Never underestimate the impact of a first impression. You may have a flawless resume, but if you fail to project confidence, style, and coherence in how you present yourself, you risk being ignored. Social ascent requires a blend of merit and appearance because the first thing others see is not your inner capacity, but what you transmit through your presence. Your body language, your clothing, your voice, even your silences are pieces of an invisible armor that either protects you or exposes you. People place you into a mental category within the first few seconds, and although you may later shift that impression, the first one is always the strongest. In the Middle Ages, kings understood this truth in the most literal sense. Many of them were in reality short, frail, or unimposing men. Yet if you look at the frescoes and murals that depict them, you'll see towering figures with broad chests and long arms, holding enormous swords they likely never could have wielded. Those exaggerated images were a conscious act of visual manipulation. The people gazing upon them weren't seeing reality, they were seeing the power their kings wanted to embody. Art was propaganda, and appearance was a shield. The peasant who saw his king painted as a giant would never dare to question whether he truly measured only 5 feet tall. Such is the power of image. It can surpass truth and establish a narrative in the minds of others. The paradox is that many intelligent and even talented people disdain this game of appearances. They believe that being competent should be enough, that sooner or later the truth will prevail. But the world does not work that way. Think of how many times someone less prepared than you landed an opportunity simply because they seemed more confident, more secure, more convincing. Perhaps you felt frustrated, thinking it was unfair. But the truth is, that person knew how to wield a weapon you despised, appearance. And that weapon, when used shrewdly, opens doors. This does not mean pretending to be what you are not, or living in a lie. It means learning to highlight what you already have in the most powerful way possible. Confidence can be practiced, style can be refined, body language can be trained. By doing so, you are not deceiving, you are maximizing your chances of being seen, because social invisibility is the great enemy of ascent. If no one sees you, you don't exist. If you don't exist, you cannot rise. Imagine walking into a room full of strangers. You could walk hunched over, staring at the ground, hoping someone will approach you. Or you could walk tall, step with confidence, look people in the eye, smile naturally, and convey that you know exactly who you are. That difference in presentation can determine who approaches you, who listens to you, and who remembers you. Often, it is not what you say that leaves a mark, but the feeling you create. Elizabeth. I did not win battles with swords, but she won respect through the way she presented herself. Medieval kings did not grow taller by magic, yet in murals they appeared larger than life. And today, in the modern world, those who climb socially, professionally, or personally are the ones who understand that image is the wrapping that makes others want to open the package of your talent. You can start using this tool right now. Observe how you dress, how you speak, how you move. Ask yourself, what message am I transmitting even before I say a word? That question is crucial because the world is constantly interpreting signals from you, and most of them don't come from your mouth, but from your presence. A confident posture can open more doors than a 10-minute speech. A direct gaze can leave a deeper impression than a resume filled with degrees. Image is silent, but it speaks for you every second. Ignore it at your own risk. Those who ascend understand that appearance is not an accessory, it is an essential part of their strategy. And although some may call it superficial, the truth is that, as La Rochefoucauld said, the world rewards appearances almost as much as merit. It is not a matter of choosing between being or seeming. It is about uniting the two, being competent and seeming so. Because if you are capable but fail to project it, you risk becoming invisible, and if you only seem without being, the facade will eventually crumble. True ascent lies in balancing merit and appearance, substance and form, real value and perceived value. What others believe about you shapes how they treat you, and that perception is fed by what you show. You must decide whether you want to be remembered as a shadow in the crowd or as someone who inspires respect even before speaking a word. The answer lies not in luck or chance, but in your ability to use image as a silent weapon that prepares the ground for your talent to shine. Chapter 3. The Game of Influence. He who controls others is strong. He who controls himself is powerful. Lao Tzu. In social life, many believe that power consists of imposing one's will, forcing others to follow orders, or raising one's voice to be heard above everyone else. But the reality is more complex, and in a way, more subtle. True ascent is not achieved through brute force, but through influence, that invisible ability to guide people, sometimes without them even realizing it. And to achieve it, before learning to control others, one must first learn to control oneself. Lao Tzu's words express it clearly. The force imposed from the outside can bend bodies, but the force born of self-control conquers minds. And in social ascent, conquering minds is infinitely more lasting than conquering spaces. Why? Because when you can make someone believe an idea is theirs, you no longer need to force them into action. They will act on their own. That is the essence of influence, the art of leading without pushing, of guiding without appearing to guide. The story of Cosimo de' Medici is a masterful example of this principle. In Renaissance Florence, he was one of the richest men in Europe, but he avoided presenting himself as an open tyrant. He did not need a throne to rule. His power was woven into the networks of influence he had built. He allowed others to believe they were making decisions, controlling the republic, having their own voices. But the truth was that nearly all of them depended on his money, his favors, his alliances. Cosimo did not proclaim himself absolute ruler. He let others feel important. And that illusion was so powerful that it kept him at the top without ever having to wield a sword. He ruled from the shadows, and many who believed they commanded were nothing more than pieces moved by him. That is the real game. It is not about constantly fighting to impose force, but about building the perception that others have freedom, when in fact they move within a framework you have designed. Cosimo understood that people's pride could be an ally. When someone thinks they are deciding for themselves, they will defend that decision more fiercely. Thus, power does not need to be obvious. It only needs to be present in the background, invisible yet decisive. For centuries, Venice developed a curious system to choose its highest authority, the Doge. To prevent powerful families from manipulating the process, they established a ritual of chance and random selection across multiple rounds. Names were drawn from urns, temporary committees were formed, internal elections repeated, ballots reshuffled, until finally a Doge was chosen. To the people, this process guaranteed that no single family could control the Republic's destiny. But in reality, the city's stability rested not on the visible figure of the Doge, but on a complex network of councils and influential families pulling strings in silence. Chance was merely a disguise, a smokescreen to ensure that power never seemed too concentrated. It was influence disguised as impartiality. This leads us to an essential understanding. Influence is always more enduring than imposition. The one who commands by shouting may obtain obedience through fear, but that fear is unstable. Sooner or later, it turns into resentment. By contrast, the one who makes people act convinced they are choosing freely achieves something deeper. And to do that, one must first master oneself, control the ego, the impulse to prove oneself right, the urge to impose crudely. Self-control is the foundation of strategy. Think of it in everyday terms. You may know someone who always wants to win every argument, who cannot help but correct everyone, who needs to have the last word. That person believes they are showing strength, but in reality, they are losing influence. They may win battles of pride, but lose the war of trust. Nobody wants to follow someone who leaves no room for others' voices. By contrast, the one who listens, who knows when to stay silent, who asks questions instead of imposing answers, often achieves far more. That person gives others the sense of protagonism, even while steering the conversation toward their own goal. To master oneself is to resist the temptation of immediate victory in favor of lasting influence. Cosimo de' Medici knew how to wait, how to give a little to gain much, how to feign humility, to rule discreetly. The Venetians knew that randomness in the Doge's election soothed tensions, even if real power remained in the same circles. You too can apply this logic in your daily life. You don't need to impose yourself at every moment. Learn instead where it is most effective to give space, appear neutral, or even allow others to feel like winners. True social ascent is not the accumulation of visible victories, but the construction of a quiet reputation. If others perceive you as someone who listens, who respects, who allows others to decide, you will gain more ground than you ever could by constant imposition. And when the time comes for you to tilt the balance, you will find that most people are already on your side, without you having had to force them. That is the difference between force and influence. Force is noticed, influence seeps in. Perhaps you're thinking that all of this requires patience, and you are right. Influence is not built overnight. It is a slow art, like sowing and waiting for the earth to yield fruit. But that slowness is what makes it solid. Force may change things quickly, but just as quickly collapses. Influence, on the other hand, grows invisible roots that sustain it over time. That is why, at the beginning of your ascent on the social ladder, you must not seek to shine like a fleeting comet, brilliant for a moment and gone the next. Learn first to master yourself. Control your words, your emotions, your impulses. Learn to design settings where others feel free, even as they move within your frame. Learn to let chance, illusion, or even appearances play in your favor, like in Venice. Learn from Cosimo de' Medici, who knew how to rule without a crown. For the one who controls others may be strong, but the one who controls himself and turns that self-mastery into influence is, in truth, the one who always ends up ruling. Chapter 4. Strategies of Silence and Patience. He who exalts himself too soon falls too quickly. Armenian proverb. Social ascent is not always won by the fastest, the loudest, or the one who frantically chases every opportunity. More often, true strength is found in patience, in the control of impulses and the ability to wait for the right moment to act. We live in a world that idolizes speed. Everything must be immediate, from responses to results. Yet haste comes at a price. The one who rises too quickly often loses clarity, rushes into wrong decisions, and wastes energy before reaching the summit. Patience, on the other hand, is a silent weapon, so discreet that many fail to recognize it as power, yet so effective that it has sustained empires and toppled rivals. History offers few examples as striking as Tokugawa Ieyasu, the shogun who unified Japan and established a regime that lasted more than 2 centuries. Ieyasu was not the most brilliant strategist nor the most feared warrior on the battlefield. In fact, his rise was marked by caution and constant waiting. In a time of bloody clan wars, when every leader sought immediate victories, he adopted a different approach: endure, observe, wait. He was a man who knew how to swallow his pride, bear temporary humiliations, and yield ground in order to secure long-term stability. While other generals rushed into battle to prove their strength, Ieyasu calculated every move with cold precision. His patience made him the last one standing when others had exhausted their resources, and when he finally acted, he did so with surgical accuracy, ensuring that his victories were not fleeting but definitive. Thanks to that strategy, he established the Tokugawa shogunate, which held Japan in relative peace for more than 250 years. The lesson is powerful. The one who masters his impulses and waits for the right moment not only wins, but consolidates his victory. Patience is also expressed in more subtle forms, even in art. Composer Joseph Haydn understood the power of silence. In his concerts, he used prolonged pauses that unsettled the audience. Imagine the scene. A packed hall, the orchestra at full climax, and suddenly, silence. Not a brief pause, but a void that forced the audience to hold its breath. That tension was magnetic. The crowd, bewildered, leaned forward, expectant, captivated by the wait. When the music finally returned, its impact was far greater. Haydn did not fill everything with sound. He understood that silence was part of the work, that the unspoken could dominate more than what was spoken. The same applies in social life. Many people believe they must speak constantly to avoid being forgotten, to fill every conversational gap with words, to assert their presence at every moment. But such saturation drains energy and diminishes the weight of what is said. By contrast, the one who knows when to remain silent, who pauses and waits for the right moment, commands a different kind of authority. Their words carry greater weight because they are not frequent, because they do not compete with noise, because they arrive at the precise instant. Silence, far from being absence, is a message. When you remain silent, you are not giving up your voice. You are saying, I can wait. I do not need to rush. I am in control of myself and of this situation. That calm unsettles others. The impatient one feels compelled to fill the gap, to explain, to justify. By staying composed, you let the environment shift toward you. That is influence. The Armenian proverb warns with blunt clarity. He who exalts himself too soon falls too quickly. And it does not only refer to anger, but to all forms of exaltation, haste, euphoria, the desperation for immediate results. The one who runs without thinking grows exhausted. The one who shouts to impose himself loses respect. The one who acts too soon exposes himself to error. Patience, by contrast, is a shield against sudden collapse. Perhaps you have seen this in everyday life, an argument where someone loses their temper and shouts, while you, staying calm, end up earning more respect. Or a negotiation where the other party rushes to accept any condition just to close the deal quickly, while you, patient, secure the better terms. That is the true value of the silent strategy. It neither drains nor rushes, it waits and seizes. Tokugawa Ieyasu endured humiliations that other leaders would never have tolerated. He could have let pride drive him into battles that would have destroyed him, but he understood that patience was his greatest weapon. Haydn used long silences in an age when music seemed to compete in filling every space. Both grasped the same truth, that apparent emptiness is not weakness, but contained strength. Applying this idea to your own ascent means learning to resist the urge to react too quickly. You don't need to respond immediately to every criticism. You don't need to prove your worth in every conversation. You don't need to win every small battle to advance in the greater war. Sometimes letting go, staying quiet, or waiting is the most powerful strategy. Patience is not passivity. It is deferred action, calculated and far more effective. Silence, likewise, is not submission. It is control. The one who remains silent while everyone shouts shows more authority than the one who joins the noise. The one who waits while everyone rushes conveys more confidence than the one who runs without direction. The one who controls his impulses inspires more respect than the one who is dragged by them. At its core, patience and silence are signs of inner power, and that inner power is what sooner or later radiates outward. As you climb in social life, you will discover that the most decisive moments are not won with exaltation, but with calm. The first impression may be made with presence, but lasting victory is secured with patience. It is a lesson not everyone wants to learn because it demands discipline, but it rewards with lasting results. So the next time you feel the urge to act immediately, to speak without thinking, to prove your strength in a burst of impulse, remember Ieyasu waiting for his moment among impatient clans. Remember Haydn holding an entire audience in suspense with calculated silence. Remember the Armenian proverb, "He who exalts himself too soon falls too quickly." And ask yourself, do I want a fleeting victory or a solid ascent? If you choose the latter, remain silent, wait, and you will see how your patience becomes the most unexpected and effective weapon of your ascent. Chapter 5. The Power of Hidden Psychology. Courtesy opens many doors that force could never break down. Turkish proverb. In the game of social ascent, people often believe that the winners are the strongest, the most dominant, the ones who shout the loudest or impose their presence. But in reality, most battles are won on an invisible battlefield, the human mind. Psychology, when used intelligently, becomes a tool far more powerful than any display of strength. A kind gesture can transform a situation that seemed closed. A calculated word can change a decision. A pause can reshape an entire conversation. Courtesy, as the Turkish proverb says, opens doors that violence could never force open. And this is not weakness, it is strategy. Ascent is built more on how you manage the minds of others than on the tangible resources you hold at any given moment. Cardinal Richelieu, a central figure in 17th century French politics, understood the power of hidden psychology better than anyone. He famously said that with just 6 lines written by an honest man, he could find enough material to condemn him. What he meant was not merely that he could manipulate the law, but that human nature reveals itself in details. A phrase written carelessly, an oversight in a letter, a reckless comment, these were enough to expose vulnerabilities he could exploit. Richelieu did not need swords or armies to destroy an enemy. It was enough to know their psychological weaknesses. This principle remains true today. You don't need an army to gain power over others. You only need to know where their insecurities lie, what they long to hear, what they fear to lose. Psychology is a silent chessboard where the most observant always holds the advantage. Social ascent demands this sharpness. Listen more than you speak, observe more than you reveal, interpret what others say without saying. Because while others focus on imposing themselves, you can focus on understanding. And the one who understands rules. What is fascinating is that much of this power is disguised as kindness. Courtesy is one of the most effective weapons because it lowers defenses. When you are polite, when you greet with a smile, when you show genuine interest, the other person lets their guard down. At that moment, their mind opens more easily to your influence. Force creates resistance. Courtesy creates receptivity. That is why a seemingly small gesture, like remembering someone's name or offering sincere thanks, can make the difference in a relationship that later becomes an opportunity. But psychology is also full of paradoxes, and one of the most surprising concerns favors. Most people believe that the one who grants a favor gains power over the one who receives it, because it creates a sense of debt. And while that is partly true, the deeper psychological reality is even more interesting. In many cases, the one who asks for a favor gains more power than the one who grants it. It may sound counterintuitive, but it has an explanation. When someone asks you for a favor and you agree, your mind seeks coherence and begins to justify why you helped. Unconsciously you think, if I helped, it must be because I like him, because I trust him, because he is valuable. And that justification strengthens the bond. It is not uncommon for the one who granted the favor to end up feeling closer and more committed to the one who asked. This phenomenon, studied in social psychology, shows that asking can be as powerful as giving. The one who knows how to ask at the right moment, with courtesy and humility, does not lower themselves. They build an invisible network of loyalties. And those loyalties sustain social ascent in the long run. Of course, this is not about abusing or asking selfishly, because that is easily detected. It is about knowing when and how to show vulnerability. Sometimes, showing that you need something creates more connection than pretending you have everything under control. The paradox is that calculated dependence can be more powerful than absolute independence. Richelieu knew how to wield both fear and courtesy. He showed harshness when necessary, but he also cultivated the image of a wise and protective man. That combination made him even more influential. He was not only feared, but also sought after. In the same way, you can learn to combine firmness with kindness, authority with closeness, power with courtesy. The balance between these facets creates a magnetic psychology that attracts rather than repels. The mistake many make in trying to rise is believing they must constantly display strength, but that constant display often becomes a heavy mask that eventually exhausts them. True strength does not need to be shouted. Sometimes it is far more influential to ask for help at the right moment, to listen more than you speak, to remain silent when others lose control, to offer thanks when someone gives you something. All of this weaves an invisible fabric that sustains and propels you without it seeming forced. In your daily life, you can begin to experiment with this hidden power of psychology. Ask yourself, how can I use courtesy as a strategic tool, not just a formality? What details can I observe in others that reveal more than their words? At what moment would asking a favor strengthen a relationship instead of weakening it? These questions take you beyond the superficial plane and into the territory where social ascent is truly played out. Remember, the one who pounds on a door with force may break it down, but he will make noise, generate resistance, and likely destroy what lies behind. The one who knocks softly with courtesy, on the other hand, is invited inside. Cardinal Richelieu did not need to raise an army to neutralize an enemy. 6 lines were enough, and within the paradox of favors lies one of the deepest secrets. It is not always the giver who gains power. Often, it is the one who asks. If you begin to apply these ideas in your life, you will discover that true power is not always visible or loud. It lives in minds, in emotions, in small gestures that seem innocent yet generate trust or fear. Psychology is a silent field, and in it, those who know how to move always hold the advantage. Force may impress for a moment, but psychology sets the course of an entire life. Chapter 6. Authority and respect without forcing power. No one likes to receive orders, but everyone follows the one who inspires. Sephardic popular wisdom. If there is something evident in any human relationship, it is that no one likes to be commanded. Forced obedience breeds resistance, resentment, and sooner or later, rebellion. Yet there exists a kind of authority that does not need to impose itself with shouts or threats, one that inspires respect without resorting to force. On the social ladder, this is the type of authority that sustains a lasting ascent, because it is not built on fear, but on genuine influence. People may comply with an order out of obligation, but they follow wholeheartedly the one who inspires them. The secret of those who have earned respect throughout history is that they achieved recognition without needing to impose their will by force. The Byzantine Empire, one of the longest lasting in history, offers a striking example of this principle. Within its complex political and administrative machinery, there were figures who, despite lacking armies or military titles, often became more powerful than generals and emperors. The eunuchs. Castrated from youth, they seemed the least threatening figures in the palace, for they could not found dynasties or perpetuate a lineage. Yet precisely for that reason, they were considered more trustworthy. Through closeness to the emperor, mastery of bureaucracy, and skill in court intrigue, eunuchs amassed immense power. Many decided alliances, negotiated treaties, and even influenced the choice of heirs to the throne. They did not impose their authority with the sword, but with cunning, diplomacy, and calculated loyalty. A general could command thousands of soldiers, but a eunuch could decide which orders reached the emperor and which were concealed. Their power was silent, but longer lasting. This teaches us that true authority does not depend on brute force, but on the ability to generate trust and project inevitability. If those around you believe your presence is necessary, your judgment valuable, and your influence decisive, they will follow you without your having to raise your voice. The Byzantine eunuchs could never have gained their place through physical imposition, but they did so by building invisible networks, inspiring trust within the palace, and placing themselves at the heart of information flow. Their example shows that respect is not demanded, it is cultivated. At the other extreme, Persian history shows us in brutal terms what happens when authority rests solely on fear. In ancient Persia, corrupt judges were punished in a horrifying way. They were executed, and their flayed skin was used to upholster the chair of their successor. The message was clear. Respect was to be imposed through terror. No judge could sit in that court without remembering the fate of his predecessor. Although such punishment ensured immediate obedience, it also created a culture rooted in fear, where authority inspired not admiration, but disgust. Forced obedience never builds true loyalty. It may maintain order in the short term, but only at the cost of resentment that eventually explodes. Applied to daily life, these lessons show that the difference between imposing and guiding is the same as the difference between superficial obedience and deep influence. The one who commands from above may gain compliance, yes, but partial compliance, laced with hidden resistance, with minds obeying even as they seek escape. By contrast, the one who inspires, who leads by example, who shows coherence between words and actions, earns followers who act even when no one is watching. That is the kind of authority that lifts you on the social ladder, authority born of voluntary respect, not imposed fear. Think of it in simple terms. Who influenced you more in your life? A boss who shouted and forced you to act under threat of punishment, or someone who, through their example, their way of carrying themselves, their trust in you, motivated you to give more than you thought possible? Most likely, you remember the latter. That is because true authority does not oppress. It elevates, it inspires. And when someone inspires you, you do not need to be forced. You follow because you want to, not because you must. The Sephardic proverb sums it up well. No one likes to receive orders, but everyone follows the one who inspires. On your path of ascent, if you try to impose your will constantly, you will meet resistance. But if you become someone who inspires respect, who projects calm and confidence, who listens and guides instead of humiliating, you will attract natural followers. And within that attraction lies the true foundation of authority. The eunuchs of Byzantium were not feared for their strength, but valued for their influence. The Persian judges, meanwhile, remembered with horror the skin on their chairs, a reminder of what happens when power is wielded with brutality. You must choose what kind of legacy to leave, that of someone who inspires genuine respect, or that of someone who generates obedience through fear. One builds solid loyalties, the other fragile compliance. One opens paths, the other digs trenches. In the end, what determines your ascent is not how many orders you can give, but how many people are willing to follow you when they have no obligation to do so. That is the measure of authentic respect. Inspire, and power will come to you naturally. Force it, and power will slip through your hands like sand. Chapter 7. Manipulation and Subtlety on the Social Ladder. The biggest fish does not survive by being strong, but by seeming unreachable. Persian proverb. In social ascent, many imagine that the key lies in strength, in amassing visible resources, or in imposing oneself without disguise. Yet those who truly manage to remain at the top know that power is rarely sustained through direct blows. What sustains it is subtlety, intelligent manipulation, the ability to create an appearance that discourages others from even attempting to attack you. Just as the biggest fish does not always survive because of its real strength, but because it seems untouchable in the minds of others, in social life, the one who triumphs is the one who projects inaccessibility, mystery, and control. Subtlety is an invisible wall. It cannot be seen, yet it stops. Catherine de' Medici, Queen Consort of France in the 16th century, was a master of this art. In an age dominated by religious wars and courts filled with intrigue, she understood that frontal violence would have destroyed her quickly. She was no general or warrior, but she turned the invisible into her greatest weapon. Her court was renowned for exquisite fragrances, but behind some of those perfumes lurked lethal power. It was said Catherine used poisoned scents to eliminate political rivals without leaving a trace. Whether this was true or legend hardly matters. What mattered was the psychological effect it produced. The mere rumor that she could turn a delicate gift into a deadly trap was enough to inspire both respect and fear. Catherine did not need to brandish a sword. Her weapon was perfume, the symbol of the subtle turned lethal. The secret of her success lay in that ambiguity. No one could ever be certain which of her gestures were innocent and which calculated. That uncertainty was her true protection. By seeming untouchable, dangerous in what was unseen, she maintained a power that, had she tried to sustain it through brute force, she would have lost. This is the essence of manipulation, not blatant lying or crude imposition, but sowing just enough doubt so that others think twice before challenging you. The history of Byzantium offers another example of subtlety turned into power. Instead of executing rivals, many emperors preferred to blind them. It was a cruel method, but it carried precise political logic. By not killing them, they avoided creating martyrs who might inspire rebellion, and by depriving them of sight, they rendered them unfit to rule, since an emperor's image had to project strength and physical wholeness. The result was that those rivals were permanently neutralized without their deaths provoking chaos. This method did not require an army to guard them constantly or an enormous repressive apparatus, just one calculated act that sent a clear message to the rest of the aristocracy. Blindness not only eliminated the rival's practical capacity, but also served as a reminder of the fragility of anyone who dared to challenge power. Both examples show that brute force, though effective in the short term, exhausts and generates visible enemies. Subtlety, by contrast, manipulates from the shadows and achieves a more stable result. Catherine inspired fear without striking because the rumor of her poisoned perfumes cloaked her in mystery. Byzantine emperors disarmed their rivals not by killing them, but by condemning them to a life of visible impotence. In this way, power was exercised without crushing everything, simply by shaping others' perceptions. In your own social path, this means understanding that sometimes it is not about proving what you can do, but about projecting what others believe you can do. To seem unreachable, like the great fish of the proverb, discourages attempts at competition. If you transmit the sense that you are always one step ahead, that you know more than you reveal, that your moves are calculated even when simple, others will hesitate before confronting you. That hesitation is your best ally. Subtlety protects you because it turns the unknown into a threat. But manipulation is not limited to instilling fear. It can also be used to guide others without them noticing. Sometimes you don't need to give a direct order to get what you want. It is enough to hint, to plant an idea in someone's mind, to give them the sense that the decision was theirs. Catherine achieved this through her aura of mystery, the Byzantine emperors through their calculated punishment, and you can do it in everyday life simply by learning to use psychology. If someone believes the choice is theirs, they will defend it more fiercely than if they felt you forced it on them. The key lies in mastering the invisible. In a meeting, it may be more effective to remain silent and observe than to speak endlessly. In a negotiation, it may work better to hint at other options than to reveal them all. In a social relationship, it may give you more power to seem difficult to reach than to be constantly available. None of this is playing dirty. It is understanding that the human mind responds more to perceptions than to realities, and the one who knows how to manipulate perceptions has an advantage over the one who only knows how to show strength. Of course, manipulation requires control and restraint. If it turns into blatant deceit, it will sooner or later be exposed and backfire. But if it is rooted in subtlety, in creating mystery, in maintaining calculated distance, in projecting inevitability, it becomes a legitimate tool of ascent. Just as Catherine never needed to wield swords, you do not need to display power at every moment. It is enough to plant the sense that you could act, even if you choose not to. That is why the Persian proverb contains a profound truth. The biggest fish does not survive because it is invincible, but because it seems unreachable. If others believe approaching you is risky, if they perceive you as operating on another level, they will avoid confrontation. In social ascent, it is not always about defeating enemies, but about making sure they never dare to attack you. And that protection comes from subtle manipulation, not obvious force. Your goal, then, is not to constantly prove that you are strong, but to project the image that you are untouchable, to inspire respect and caution like Catherine in her perfumed court or the Byzantine emperors who blinded rivals instead of killing them. That blend of mystery, control, and subtlety places you in a position where others prefer to tread carefully around you, or, better yet, to keep their distance. And therein lies the true victory, not in winning visible battles, but in avoiding them altogether because everyone already sees you as too difficult to reach. Chapter 8. Charisma as a Strategy of Power. There is no worse loneliness than the company of a hypocrite. Hippocrates of Chios. Social ascent does not depend solely on intelligence, patience, or strategy. It is also sustained by an element which, though intangible, can be more decisive than any material resource: charisma. That ability to generate trust, to inspire, to captivate others with presence alone, is not based on empty artifices, but on an authenticity that disarms. That is why the phrase of Hippocrates of Chios resonates so strongly. Hypocrisy may deceive for an instant, but it never creates true connection. And the one surrounded by hypocrites, or who pretends to be what he is not, ends in solitude. Charisma, on the other hand, is born from the coherence between what one is and what one projects. That coherence is what creates real attraction. Frederick Douglass, born a slave in the United States, understood better than anyone how charisma could transform not only his own life, but that of millions. For a slave, reading was forbidden. A man who reads begins to think, and a man who thinks is no longer a slave. But Douglass, conscious that words were power, secretly learned to read. Each word conquered was a key, each text deciphered, a step toward freedom. It was not mere technical learning, it was the building of a voice. When he finally escaped slavery and began to speak publicly, his eloquence astonished all who heard him. He had no weapons, no titles, no wealth, but he possessed something undeniable, a charisma born from the truth of his experience. Every word he spoke carried authenticity, lived pain, and real hope. Crowds listened not because he was a perfect orator, but because he conveyed a truth that could be felt in the air. That is the force of charisma, when voice and life coincide, when what you say is backed by who you are. Charisma is not a magical quality reserved for a few. It is the ability to connect from what is genuine, and that connection is more powerful than any shouted command. During the French Revolution, some orators understood this principle and used it strategically. In the assembly, logic alone was not enough. One had to move hearts. Some deliberately wept at the podium, breaking the barrier between cold discourse and human emotion. Those tears were not signs of weakness, but of power. They moved the masses, won applause, and generated loyalty. In a context where ideas clashed fiercely, emotion proved more persuasive than reason. The people did not follow the most rational, they followed the most convincing, and conviction was best conveyed through sincere tears rather than calculated numbers. In your own ascent, charisma becomes the tool that opens paths where logic alone cannot. People remember less what you said and more how you made them feel. You may have an impeccable argument, but if you stir no emotion, you will remain in the shadows. By contrast, an authentic gesture, a word spoken with conviction, a steady gaze, these can mark more deeply than any elaborate treatise. The problem is that many confuse charisma with acting. They believe being charismatic means wearing a constant smile, pleasing everyone, or faking emotions to manipulate. But that is the trap of hypocrisy that Hippocrates warned about. It may work for an instant, but it never builds loyalty. Authentic charisma is born from congruence. Douglas moved people because every word he spoke was true. The revolutionary orators stirred crowds because their tears expressed what the people felt. It was not empty theater, it was channeled emotion. And that difference is crucial. True charisma is not faked, it is transmitted. You too can cultivate it without artifices. Charisma is built from within, first by believing in what you say, then by showing coherence between your actions and your words, and finally, by daring to show your humanity. People are drawn to leaders who seem human, not those who hide behind perfect masks. When you sincerely reveal vulnerability, when you share a real emotion, you become more relatable and, paradoxically, more powerful. Because power that comes from human connection is stronger than that born of fear. Seen in this way, social ascent does not depend solely on being the smartest or the most calculating. It also depends on being the most remembered, the most inspiring, the one most capable of touching the emotional core of those around you. Think of the people you have followed in your life. Were they always the brightest? Or were they the ones who made you feel something different, the ones who inspired your trust, admiration, or respect? That is the effect of charisma, leaving a mark on the emotional memory of others. What is interesting is that charisma can be either quiet or expansive. Douglas carried it in his voice and gaze, revolutionary orators in their tears, and other leaders projected it through serene calm, through silence that commanded respect. It is not a single mold, but rather finding your own way of connecting from what is genuine. In practice, this means daring to speak with conviction, not with mechanical phrases. It means daring to truly listen, because listening is also charismatic. Few things attract more than the feeling of being genuinely heard. It means daring to show enthusiasm without fear of ridicule, because passion, when authentic, is contagious. Charisma is a fire that spreads, not because you try to manipulate, but because your own energy transmits it. And here is the key point: charisma cannot be memorized. It is cultivated through authenticity. When you act in coherence with what you are and what you believe, you project magnetism. When you fake it, sooner or later it is noticed, and then you become that hypocrite whose company is worse than solitude. What builds loyalty is not the perfect mask, but the genuine spark that makes others feel they are in the presence of someone real. So, in your ascent, do not obsess only with cold strategy, imposing appearances, or calculated patience. Also, cultivate the art of charisma, the ability to inspire, to move, to connect from authenticity. Remember Douglas, who with every word learned in secret was forging a power greater than any sword. Remember the French orators who moved crowds more effectively with tears than with statistics. And remember Hippocrates of Chios. There is no worse loneliness than the company of a hypocrite. If you want real followers, do not deceive them, inspire them. For in the end, charisma is not a disguise. It is the reflection of your inner truth turned into social power. Chapter 9. Controlling the environment to gain advantage. He who speaks too much soon says what he should not. Sephardic wisdom. In social ascent, strength and intelligence alone are not enough. Whoever relies only on personal talent without paying attention to their surroundings is doomed to fail. The key is not only in what you do, but in how you shape and control the environment in which you move. The environment can be an invisible ally that amplifies your power, or a silent enemy that undermines you from within. Knowing how to control it is what separates the strategist who remains at the top from the one who, by speaking too much, ends up revealing his weakness and falling into the trap of others. General Subotai, right-hand man to Genghis Khan, understood this truth better than anyone. Even though his name is far less known than that of Alexander the Great, his conquests were even greater. Born of humble origins, without nobility or aristocratic blood, Subotai rose thanks to his ability to read the terrain, not only on the battlefield, but also in the political and cultural game. While other generals relied on sheer brutality, he shaped the environment to secure victory even before the battle began. Subotai was a master at manipulating geography and perception. When attacking a city, he would not launch a direct assault immediately. He first altered the psychological environment, spreading rumors, sowing panic, making the enemy believe they were surrounded before he even appeared. One of his most brilliant tactics was to feign retreat, luring the enemy away from their fortress into a terrain where the Mongols had already prepared an ambush. He did not win solely with force, he won with the environment. Those who felt safe within their fortress discovered too late that their security was a carefully crafted illusion. This is how he conquered immense territories, surpassing even those achieved by Alexander. His power did not lie only in the sword, but in his ability to shape space and circumstances to his favor. Social ascent works in much the same way. It is not enough to know what you can do. You must design the stage where your actions take place. Think of your daily life, a meeting, a negotiation, a decisive conversation. If you talk too much, as Sephardic wisdom warns, you risk giving away information the other can use against you. But if you learn to control the environment, the tone of the conversation, the physical space, the arrangement of people, even without speaking, you can tip the balance in your favor. The environment is that board where others believe they are moving freely without realizing you have already placed the pieces. The history of Ming China offers a fascinating example of how far the environment could be controlled. At that time, color was a matter of life and death. Yellow, reserved exclusively for the emperor, was considered an absolute symbol of celestial power. Any official, no matter how high-ranking, who dared to wear that color could be executed. It was not just an aesthetic issue, but a way to mark the social space and to make clear who dominated the stage. The emperor controlled his environment not only with armies, but with symbols, imposing invisible rules that everyone obeyed. In this way, each person immediately knew their place. The strength of imperial power lay not only in its palaces or its armies, but in the ability to shape everyday life down to the smallest details. If we think carefully, this is not so different from what happens in modern life. Colors, symbols, gestures, and spaces convey power without words. In a workplace, the layout of an office can already signal invisible hierarchies. At a social event, the way one dresses creates a code that indicates status. Controlling the environment means understanding these codes and using them to your advantage. Those who ignore them end up isolated. Those who master them gain an advantage without others realizing how. Moreover, the environment is not only physical, it is also emotional. In an argument, the one who controls the emotional tone controls the outcome. If you allow the other to drag you into anger, you lose. But if you manage to stay calm while the other grows agitated, the environment shifts in your favor. Calm becomes power because it disarms the opponent's fury. This is what Subotai did in his strategies. He did not need his enemies to be weak. It was enough for them to lose control of their mental environment. The Sephardic saying reminds us that excess words open the door to vulnerability. Talking too much is handing over control of the environment to the other because you allow your mental environment to become transparent. True mastery lies in saying less, observing more, and shaping circumstances without display. Subotai moved armies with silences and feigned retreats. The Ming emperor ruled with a color that no one else could wear. In both cases, the environment was designed to tilt power to one side without the need to force it. Your task in social ascent is to learn to see the environment as a board you can configure. Ask yourself, what invisible details can I manage to tilt the situation? What symbols transmit my position? What silences speak louder than words? And above all, how can I avoid giving away control by talking too much or showing what I should not? Advantage rarely comes from spectacular moves. It almost always comes from adjusting invisible pieces that others overlook. Subotai conquered more than Alexander, not because he was stronger, but because he knew how to manipulate the terrain, both physical and psychological, where battle took place. The Ming emperor did not need to execute thousands to impose respect. It was enough to forbid a color. And you, on your path, do not need to impose yourself with brute force or endless speeches. It is enough to learn to control what surrounds the interaction. Power lies not only within you, but in how you shape what surrounds you. Mastering the environment is like pulling the invisible strings of a puppet. Others believe they act freely, but in reality, they dance to the rhythm you have set. That is the silent advantage of those who ascend with solidity. They speak little, observe much, and let the stage play in their favor. Chapter 10. Risk, Cunning, and Opportunity. He who masters his time masters men. Social ascent is not a straight or safe path, but rather a terrain filled with risks, traps, and opportunities that appear and vanish like lightning. The difference between those who prosper and those who fall lies not so much in luck, but in the ability to read the moment, to use cunning to seize what others overlook, and to take risks when everyone else hesitates. Whoever learns to master time, as the maxim inspired by Gracian says, ends up mastering others, because while some act too late or too soon, the strategist knows how to wait and leap at the precise instant. The story of Jacques Coeur, a French merchant and banker of the 15th century, starkly illustrates what it means to play with risk and opportunity. Born a peasant, far from courts and riches, he possessed an uncommon shrewdness. From an early age, he understood that true fortune was not found only in the fields or basic trades, but in daring to explore trade routes, invest in ships, and lend money to those no one else would support. His instinct made him the personal financier of King Charles VII, amassing unimaginable wealth for someone of his origins. For years, Jacques Coeur was synonymous with prosperity. His ships traded from the Mediterranean to the Levant, his loans sustained wars and crowns, and his network of contacts made him indispensable to the monarchy. But what elevated him was also what ruined him. His success attracted the envy of nobles who could not bear the idea of a peasant-turned-merchant controlling more wealth than they did. When the Queen died, his enemies seized on rumors and false accusations to blame him for poisoning her. The king, who had benefited so much from him, could not resist the pressure of the nobility. Jacques Coeur was arrested, stripped of his fortune, and forced to flee. He died in exile, far from the power he had built. His life shows that risk does not lie only in failure, but also in rising too quickly or too high. The cunning that took him to the top could not save him from the envy of those who would never accept his ascent. The lesson is clear. It is not enough to be cunning to gain power. One must also be cunning to sustain it. Jacques Coeur knew how to take risks and seize opportunities, but he failed to measure the resentment he provoked. Well-used opportunity must be accompanied by strategic camouflage, learning to prosper without awakening excessive hatred, to grow without humiliating with your brilliance those who might bring you down. Time, in this sense, is a decisive ally. Had he known when to stop, he might have kept part of his fortune and power. Mastering time is not only about knowing when to advance, but also when to hold back. In the Renaissance, this balance between risk and opportunity took another form. A single poem could ruin a reputation with more force than an entire army. Satire was a feared weapon because it attacked the intangible, public perception. While an army needed months of campaigning to destroy a castle, a poet could, in a single day, demolish a noble's image, ridiculing him so deeply that society at large viewed him with contempt. This historical curiosity reminds us that risk does not always come from where it seems. It is not enough to shield yourself from swords and armies. One must also beware of words, mockery, and collective opinion. And in that arena, cunning outweighs strength. Today, though satirical poems no longer circulate in the halls of Florence or Venice, the principle remains intact. A well-timed joke, a public criticism that goes viral, can destroy what once seemed untouchable. The opportunity to damage reputations multiplies in environments where perception is more valuable than truth. In this setting, prudence and timing are essential. Taking risks without measuring consequences may win you a fleeting triumph, but also an immediate disaster. To master time is to learn to read the pulse of others. Sometimes the greatest cunning is not to act, but to wait for the enemy to make a mistake. He who rushes reveals his cards. He who waits, observes, and strikes at the precise moment, conquers. This was how great generals and leaders endured. Not by being the quickest to move, but the wisest to wait. Jacques Coeur, for all his vision, fell because he did not know when to stop. The nobles waited until he had accumulated enough envy against him, and then they crushed him. Life constantly offers opportunities disguised as risks. Many reject them out of fear, others seize them desperately and fail. True ascent lies in finding the middle ground, risking with calculation, seizing what others disdain, but always measuring the moment. The maxim adapted from Gracian is not mistaken. He who masters his time masters others, because he compels them to move at the rhythm he has set. In your own life, think of how many opportunities you have let pass out of fear, or how many you have taken without weighing the consequences. The road to the top requires the audacity to take risks and the intelligence to calculate. As in the Renaissance, where a poem could destroy a career, today the environment can change in an instant. Cunning does not consist in avoiding all risk, but in choosing which to take and when. Just as Jacques Coeur transformed his humble origins into greatness by betting on trade routes others ignored, you too can see opportunities where others see impossibilities. But do not forget the other half of the lesson. Sustaining power requires the same cunning as obtaining it. Risk does not end with success, it merely begins. Envy, satire, public opinion, hidden resentments, these are enemies as lethal as any defeat on the battlefield. The mastery of time, prudence in words, and well-measured boldness are the keys to ascent. Advancing too quickly, like Jacques Coeur, can make you a target for destruction. Ignoring the power of perception, as many nobles ridiculed in poems discovered, can cost you more than a war. Opportunity is a double-edged blade. It cuts in favor of those who know how to wield it, but mortally wounds those who handle it carelessly. What determines your place on the social ladder is not only how much you risk or how cunning you are, but your ability to read time. He who masters his time, as the saying reminds us, draws others into his rhythm, and in that rhythm lies the decision of who ascends and who is left behind. Chapter 11. When Power Turns into Fragility. He who smiles too much hides a dagger. Tibetan proverb. Power, when viewed from the outside, seems like an impenetrable wall. Kings, leaders, and men and women who reach the top are admired as if they were unbreakable. But the reality is that power is a mask as fragile as porcelain. It may shine with intensity, but a single unexpected blow is enough to shatter it. And what is most unsettling is that often it is not the external enemy who breaks it, but internal weakness disguised as virtue. The Tibetan proverb warns us of this. He who smiles too much, who shows himself overly kind or trusting, may be hiding a danger, or worse, may be doomed to be devoured by those who never smile. Henry VI of England is one of the most painful examples of how goodness, in excess and without cunning, can become a curse. Son of Henry V, a military hero, he inherited a powerful throne and a respected kingdom. But Henry VI lacked the temperament of a monarch. He was devout, pious, kind to the point of naivety. His contemporaries described him as a man incapable of the harshness that power demanded. In times of intrigue, civil wars, and unbridled ambition, his kindness turned into weakness. During his reign, the Wars of the Roses broke out, pitting the houses of York and Lancaster against each other and plunging England into decades of chaos. Henry, unable to impose authority, became a prisoner on his own throne, manipulated by some, betrayed by others. His crown, which should have been a symbol of strength, became a burden he could not bear. Eventually, he was deposed and murdered. His tragedy was not the absence of power, but the inability to wield it with firmness. This example reveals an uncomfortable truth. Power is not sustained by good intentions, but by the ability to balance firmness and compassion. Too much harshness breeds hatred, but too much kindness opens the door to manipulation. The one who ascends must understand that smiling excessively, as the Tibetan proverb says, is not a sign of peace, but of weakness in a world where someone is always ready to take advantage. Tsarist Russia offers another reminder of how fragile even absolute power can be. There, where the Tsars seem to embody divine authority, a simple letter could become a weapon of political destruction. Love letters, seemingly innocent, were used as tools of blackmail to manipulate and ruin reputations. In a world of intrigue, where alliances were built and broken within days, a single intercepted missive was enough to unleash scandal and cause downfall. What should have been an intimate expression became a political instrument. The fragility of power lay in its dependence on perception. A czar or a noble could lose influence not because of a military defeat, but because of a sigh written on paper. Social ascent, then, requires caution, even in the smallest personal details. It is not paranoia, it is strategy. Those who underestimate small gestures forget that what seems fragile can be turned into an invisible dagger. A letter, a confidence, a misplaced word can destroy what took years to build. Controlling information, knowing what to show and what to hide, becomes indispensable to prevent internal fragility from being used against you. But there is another side to this story, that of those who, aware of power's fragility, choose to abandon it before being destroyed by it. The Roman Emperor Diocletian, after decades ruling a tumultuous empire, made a decision that shocked everyone. He renounced the throne and retired to grow cabbages at his villa in Dalmatia. When his former allies tried to persuade him to return to power, he refused with irony, saying he preferred tending his gardens to bearing the burdens of the empire once again. His gesture was as disconcerting as it was revealing. A man who understood that power could become an unbearable burden chose the peace of the earth over the glory of the purple. The anecdote of Diocletian shows us that power, if not handled with balance, is not only fragile, it can become a prison. Some cling to it so desperately that they are consumed by it, while others, like Diocletian, manage to let go before collapsing. That is another form of cunning, understanding that sometimes withdrawing in time is more powerful than resisting until destruction. Social ascent is a path full of risks, but also of temptations. The greatest danger is not always rivals, but the illusion of invulnerability. Henry VI thought kindness would be enough. Russian nobles thought their intimacy was safe. Many Roman emperors believed themselves eternal until they were assassinated. Diocletian, on the other hand, understood that power is only useful if it does not destroy the one who wields it. In your own life, this means learning to read the cracks in your power. It is not enough to reach the top. You must recognize when that peak is crumbling beneath your feet. Sometimes fragility hides behind an excessive smile, behind a kind gesture without calculation, behind an intimate word poorly guarded. True strength lies in anticipating those weaknesses and correcting them before they turn into weapons against you. Power is always fragile because it depends on perceptions, alliances, and symbols. The key is not to trust it blindly, but to manage it with the awareness that it can break at any moment. Cultivate respect without being naive. Share emotions without arming others. Step back when it is wise instead of clinging blindly. These are the strategies that prevent your ascent from ending in tragedy. For in the end, power that is not handled with cunning becomes its own enemy. Henry VI suffered this with his excessive kindness. Russian nobles learned it through letters turned into chains, and Diocletian understood it by preferring his cabbages to his throne. You, if you wish to ascend and endure, must always remember the Tibetan warning: too much smiling may conceal a dagger, and what seems like strength today may become fragility tomorrow. Chapter 12. The Supreme Art, Leaving a Mark at the Top. Strive to continually recreate yourself, or the world will forget you. Reaching the top is an extraordinary achievement, but it is not everything. The true art of power lies in remaining there and, above all, in leaving a mark. What many forget is that the memory of the world is short and cruel. What seems indestructible today may tomorrow be replaced by a brighter novelty. Hence the warning: whoever does not reinvent, whoever does not recreate themselves, ends up forgotten. The summit is not a fixed throne. It is a stage where you must remain relevant, surprising, and necessary. It is not enough to achieve power. One must turn it into legacy. The example of Calouste Gulbenkian, nicknamed Mr. 5%, shows how one can dominate an entire world without holding political office or commanding armies. Gulbenkian was an Armenian born in the Ottoman Empire at the end of the 19th century who, with vision and cunning, saw before anyone else the potential of oil. While others focused on traditional industries, he bet on black gold and, above all, on negotiating with patience and precision. His nickname came from his ability to always secure a 5% share in major international oil deals. It may sound small, but that 5% connected him to nearly every important operation on the planet. Without raising his voice, without speeches, without armies, Gulbenkian became the invisible man behind the energy that powered the world. His power did not lie in appearing on front pages, but in knowing how to move in the shadows, in weaving lasting agreements, and in reinventing himself each time the international board changed. When the Ottoman Empire fell, he had already secured his place in European negotiations. When the great oil companies emerged, he ensured his 5% remained untouchable. Gulbenkian left a mark because he understood that power at the top is not noise or ostentation, but silent permanence. His legacy endures. Even today, his name appears in museums, foundations, and contracts. The summit demands that capacity for recreation. If you stay still, the world will pass you by. History is full of brilliant leaders who reached power and were later swept away by the inertia of their own rigidity. Gulbenkian, on the other hand, understood that true power is flexible. It adapts to time, changes shape, reinvents itself without losing essence. Just as water takes the shape of its container without ceasing to be water, whoever wishes to remain at the top must adopt new forms without betraying their core. In Japan, this idea of permanence and subtlety was conveyed through a silent art, harage. More than a communication technique, it was a way of conveying authority without words. It consisted of projecting calm, security, and inner mastery so that the interlocutor perceived the message without the need for explicit phrases. A master of harage could impose respect or convey decision with just a look, a pause, or a barely perceptible gesture. In a world where words can wear out or be misinterpreted, harage turned presence itself into a message. This Japanese practice reveals a secret that applies both to the samurai court and to modern social ascent. Leaving a mark is not always about what you say or do, but about what others feel when you are present. Sometimes, confident silence impacts more than a speech, steady calm more than a burst of enthusiasm. The mark imprinted does not fade with time, because it lodges in the emotional memory of those who receive it. So, what does it mean in practice to leave a mark at the top? It means not relying on the laurels of success, but renewing yourself constantly. It means learning to combine visibility with invisibility, appearing when your presence multiplies your authority, and withdrawing when overexposure dilutes your strength. It means, like Gulbenkian, finding a unique space, even if it seems small, that connects you to everything that matters. And it means, as in harage, understanding that the most powerful is not always the loudest, but that which conveys inevitability without speaking. The danger of the summit is that once reached, many believe the work is done. They think they can now rest, that their power will be eternal. But the truth is that the summit does not forgive passivity. Whoever stops moving, whoever does not recreate their position, is left behind. The summit demands constant movement, adaptation, reinvention. There is no definitive victory, only temporary victories that must be renewed. The phrase inspired by Green warns harshly, "Strive to continually recreate yourself, or the world will forget you." That recreation does not mean losing your essence, but updating it. Like an actor who plays different roles throughout his career, yet always leaves his mark on each performance, the true strategist of power changes form but preserves substance. Others recognize him, even when he appears under new masks. In your life, leaving a mark is not just about being remembered for a great achievement. It is about creating a personal narrative that others cannot ignore. It may be your way of speaking, your style of negotiating, your leadership, your capacity to inspire. That mark, if cultivated consistently, becomes the invisible thread that keeps you present even when you are not physically there. Just as Gulbenkian is in the history of oil without ever being a king or emperor, you can remain in the memory of others without shouting your importance. The supreme art, ultimately, is not only to reach, but to remain. And remaining is not resisting immobile, but moving with time, reinventing with it, mastering it like a musician conducting a changing orchestra without losing the melody. Power becomes fragile when it relies on rigidity, but it becomes eternal when it learns to flow. Leaving a mark at the top means accepting that the world will forget the one who stagnates, but remember the one who reinvents himself again and again. Gulbenkian, with his 5%, understood this. The masters of Harrogate, with their silence filled with presence, practiced it. And you, on your path, can do it if you always remember that the summit is not a destination, but a moving stage. Only those who learn to recreate themselves can remain and be remembered. You have listened to Your Ascent on the Social Ladder. Discover how to reach the top. A work created by Oscar Gonzalez for Biblio Studio. Dear listener, thank you very much for joining us. Best regards and blessings.